Hello, my name is Brittany Benson, and I did my lesson plan for a ninth grade health class. It's going to be a 40-minute class period, and the unit is alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Our lesson topic today is reasons people use and abuse alcohol. I'll be addressing two standards. The first one will be Standard 2. Students will analyze the influence of family, peers, culture, media, technology, and other factors on health behaviors. And then Standard 3, students will demonstrate the ability to access valid information, products, and services to enhance health. I'll be covering 4 learning objectives, so students will be able to recognize the biological, genetic, and environmental factors that contribute to alcohol use and abuse by completing the group worksheet. Students will demonstrate the ability to access valid information regarding the influences on alcohol use and abuse by finding a valid and reliable information source that supports the findings in the textbook. I'm working my lesson plan off of this textbook. It's Comprehensive Health. This is the textbook that the high school that I work at uses for their health curriculum for the ninth grade level, specifically for the ninth grade reading level. So the lesson, a lot of the information will be derived from this book. Students will be able to distinguish between the levels of alcohol consumption by completed guided notes during the presentation. In regards to guided notes, this is just me printing out the PowerPoint for students and giving them the lines next to each slide. So they can either mark down important information, they can jot down notes that maybe aren't on the PowerPoint slide, but I said aloud. And then also students will understand alcoholism as a disease and identify some key characteristics of alcoholism by completing guided notes during the presentation as well. So to start off today's lesson, I really like the idea of using bell ringers and getting students involved right away in the topic and to get them thinking about what we're going to be discussing during the class. So when students come in, they'll be asked to take out their journals. On the board, there will be a table drawn, and it'll have 2 columns. One column will say internal influences, and the other column will say external influences. And here I'm just going to be asking students to give me examples of each one and how these influences may affect one's alcohol use. And it's not specifically about their individual life, it's about people in general. So I'll give them a couple minutes to brainstorm about these ideas. And then after a couple minutes, I'm going to have them turn to a partner, and they are going to do a think, pair, share. So their partner will share their ideas, and they'll share their own, and they'll jot down any ideas that they didn't have on their table. And then finally, we'll come together as a class, and then on our whiteboard at the front of the room, we'll compile a full list of all the internal and external influences that people came up with. So whether it's the external influences of peers and family members or internal influences of one genuinely just being curious about what alcohol tastes like and they want to try it. And then after this, I'll give students some time to write down and copy the list, and then we'll move into the PowerPoint presentation. And the PowerPoint, again, we'll start off with the reasons people use and abuse alcohol. We have our learning objectives for the class that I had stated earlier that are within my lesson plan. And then we'll start by talking about the levels of alcohol consumption. So what it means to be a regular drinker and what that standard looks like versus being either an occasional drinker or someone who doesn't drink at all. We'll talk about moderate drinking. So that's usually the standard is 1 drink a day for women, 2 drinks a day for men on average. And then also how moderate drinkers do not tend to lose control or experience alcohol-related problems from their drinking. And then we'll talk about binge drinking, so what that means. So 4 or more drinks for women, 5 or more drinks for men in a single occasion. And then also I really like this picture here that tells students what counts as 1 drink, because a lot of the times you might not know if you're filling up a cup and you have no idea what's in it. So this just gives people an idea of how much they're actually drinking. And then we'll talk about problem drinking. So at this point, someone is not an alcoholic, but they are experiencing negative consequences from their drinking behavior. This can be social issues, whether they're fighting with family members or friends because of their drinking. They can be having some legal issues. They could be getting in trouble if they're underage. They could be experiencing some issues at school. Maybe they're not turning in assignments because of their drinking behaviors. Or if they're an adult, maybe they're not showing up to work because of their drinking habits. And at this point, usually the individual has a psychological dependence with alcohol. And we'll discuss what this means to have a mental or an emotional connection and dependence on alcohol. So whether that's needing to use alcohol to function at a social event or just having the craving mentally and emotionally to deal with certain events and needing alcohol to do that. And then we'll talk about alcoholism. So now the psychological and physical dependence on alcohol. And we'll talk about physically what that means. So if someone is physically dependent, their body needs it in order to not experience withdrawal symptoms. And then we'll talk about how alcoholism is recognized as a disease. We'll go over the stages of addiction and what those look like. So experimentation. We'll talk a little bit about how research shows that early use tends to lead to alcohol-related issues later on in life. We'll talk about regular use, kind of linking back what we talked about the class before with short-term and long-term effects on the body and how even regular use can contribute to some of those negative consequences. We'll talk about tolerance and what that means, as well as dependence and addiction, again, going over what it means to be psychologically and physically dependent on alcohol. And then here I'll bring up the idea of mental models. So I'll ask students, in this picture of these three people, are we more likely to think that one of these people is an alcoholic versus another? And I want students to start realizing what they think about when they think of alcoholism, and if they understand that this is a disease that can affect anyone of any gender, age, race, socioeconomic status. It does not discriminate. And then from there, we'll talk about just some key characteristics of alcoholism and abuse. And I want students to know from that slide before that different cultures are going to have different definitions of alcoholism and what it means to abuse alcohol. What abusing alcohol to me may be different from someone that's living in a different area or is from a different culture. And then we'll talk about how abuse usually just means that problems are starting to occur, whether that's with someone's physical, mental, or social health. And a lot of the times now, alcohol is interfering with their personal responsibilities. And then with alcoholism, we'll talk about some key symptoms. So whether that's a high tolerance, frequent periods of memory loss, the inability to create or complete responsibilities. You hear a lot from alcoholics that they need alcohol to function normally with their day. And then we'll talk about withdrawal symptoms and what that means. So if alcohol isn't present, the alcoholic will experience either hallucinations, nausea, anxiety, maybe some cognitive disruptions, and then possibly seizures. And then here, relating back to what we did at the beginning of class, I'm going to ask students what influences affect alcohol use and abuse. And we have that full list on the board, and then I will introduce the activities to students. So now it's going to be their turn. So they are going to complete a class activity that focuses on 5 influences. So genetic, biological, environmental influences, and then the 3 specific environmental ones are family, peers, and media. So for our activity, we're going to do a jigsaw. So students are going to be put into groups, and they're going to focus on one of those specific influences. And the worksheet looks like this. So let's say if I'm assigned biological influences, I'm going to work with my group, and I'm going to use the textbook. And they're pretty small passages. They're either a paragraph or 2 paragraphs, but they're going to read the passage. They're going to answer the questions from the passage. And then they're going to find an article with their group that talks about whatever influence that they're researching. So in regards to biological influences, they'll find something that talks about that. They'll talk about what the main message is from the article, how the article either supports or refutes the information in the textbook, and then one important takeaway. So they will fill out one of these sections with their group, and then we'll jigsaw. So the groups will split up. Each member will get with a different member of a different group, and then each group member is going to share what they found. So there'll be 5 new group members, and so with their group, they'll have this filled out, but by the end of the jigsaw activity, they will have this whole packet filled out with information from other group members. And then finally, after we're done doing that, if we have time, we'll talk about questions and we'll discuss those answers as a class. If we run out of time, we'll talk about it the next day. But before students go, I'm going to have them fill out an exit slip. And I'm just going to ask students what influence do they think contributes most to alcohol use and why. I'm not looking for a right or wrong answer. I just want students to start thinking about what they think might most affect someone. And then also, I just want to see what kind of information they give to support their argument. So, are they grasping the concepts and the ideas that I want them to understand about how there's so many things that influence our health behaviors, not just alcohol, but as a whole healthy person. And then here are my resources, and that is my lesson plan. Thank you.